So today we're landing our series called What Happy Couples Know, and you guys have sent in questions to us that today we're going to be answering for you. And joining us up on here on the platform, first of all, leading the discussion is going to be Desiree Forbes. Give it up for Desiree. Yay. And then I'm going to ask Pastor Dave and Becky first to come on up and take your place. And Pastor Lucas and Christine Ashley to come on up as well. And then my bride, Maria, is going to be joining us too. So, yay. All right. Well, we're going to have some fun today. And by the way, for those of you that are single, thank you for, kind of tuning in to what we're talking about. For some of you, you go, hey, I don't have any interest in getting married. That's not on a radar screen, whatever. Whenever we do a series that doesn't have a direct application to you, I hope you still learn the wisdom of it because you've got people around you that you can minister to with the things that you learn. So let me encourage you, always keep your heart open. Everything that we cover in any series is always going to be helpful, not only for you, and if not you, then certainly your friends. So anyway, Miss Desiree, would you take it away?
Can you guys hear me? Oh, hello. Good morning, friends. Welcome. So glad to have everyone here today. So let's kick this off. All right. Question for all of the pastors. We're going to start with Pastor Mark and Maria, though. What things did you do to prepare for marriage?
The first thing that I did was I gave my life to Jesus. That was by far the most important step I took, was to make a full and complete surrender of my life to the Lord. And then after that, honestly, the next most important decision that I made was we stopped sleeping together. And it's true. I moved out. We'd been dating as non-Christians for 4 years up to that point, and we were living together. And as soon as I made that surrender and we realized what the scriptures taught, I said, you know what? I just want to get things right underneath God's blessing. And so moving out, and that enabled marriage to feel fresh and new as well when we got married. And then the last thing is I prayed like crazy. And that was important because I really knew that she was the one for me. God really showed me that. And so when things got hard, I didn't bail on the relationship because I knew that she was the one and that God was doing something to shape me. So those are the most important things for me.
I ran to Florida. It wasn't that I was afraid of marrying Mark. I was afraid of marriage in general. I was very independent, and I moved down here and to get away from all of that decision. But years ago when we were dating, I got this impression that Mark really was a diamond in the rough. And he was a wonderful man, and I'm so glad that he chased me to Florida and married me.
It's called stalking now. Stalking. It's called stalking now. Then it was called chasing.
I think the biggest thing that we did was we asked questions. And what I mean by that is, who's ever heard the phrase that the first year of marriage is the hardest? Who ever heard that? I think the reason that that's true is because you're discovering answers to questions you never asked. We talked about a few weeks ago that, marriage isn't adding someone to your life, it's leaving your life and joining them for a new one. The problem is most of us don't do that, and so we just try to add someone into our chaos, and that immediately ensues to where, who's going to do the finances? Do you have the same view of debt and credit? Do you have the same view of how you're going to have kids, raise kids? How many kids are you going to have? A lot of us go into marriage with that thought of, we'll figure it out. You will, but it's going to hurt a lot more. And so for us, we've always kind of jokingly believed that, marriage is this odd and awesome thing because you take two sinners, put them in a house together, and tell them to live happily ever after. And it just doesn't happen easily and naturally. It takes work and it takes choices. And for us, the best piece of advice we got during premarital counseling, which was a huge step for us too, was just to ask questions and just to figure out what is our answer going to be. I have mine, she has hers. What's our answer going to be when it comes to a lot of these things?
I think something that was really huge for us is that Luke and I were friends. Like, I like him. I like hanging out with him. So, our relationship, for the first 2.5 years of our relationship, we were best friends. And so I think that us starting out our relationship, we had a friendship, was really crucial to us because I want to do things with him. We have a lot in common. I want to have, fun and do stuff with him. The other thing that we did, something that I was super passionate about was the women that were in my life, my mentors, my pastors. I wanted to seek those women out, and I was watching these godly women of how they were living, how they were mothering, how they were wives, how they were, doing ministry too, and watching what they were doing, just kind of observing and then inviting them in to literally give me every bit of advice. Sometimes that entailed like me just going to their house and like having dinner or just hanging out, just so many things because I wanted to consume everything that I could to watch what healthy marriages look like because all of our marriages are so different. They're uniquely yours. And so what works for some does not always work for others because personalities are different, histories and legacies are different. And so I think that's what is so crucial is that you watch. I love to watch. And so just to gather and invite people in to speak truth and life into us of what that looks like.
Yeah, that's so good. I think it's important to learn from the wisdom of others, and their challenges and their mistakes and their champion in moments, and it's awesome to learn from that. So that's great wisdom. Becky?
We did premarital counseling, which is really, really important for anybody who is getting married soon. We offer premarital counseling at the church here, so you can call here. It's called SYMBIS, Saving Your Marriage Before It Starts, and it asks really great questions about each other. You get to know each other in a different way than you probably, like they said, you ask different questions, the right questions to ask, and so yeah, I'd say also that we were careful of what voices to listen to. We had many people in our lives that were non-Christians and many that were Christians, and it was just really important to figure out what are the right voices to listen to who are going to point you closer to God and not further away.
Yeah, that's great.
And we also set actual boundaries in the conversations we had, like Luke and Christine alluded to. We talked about, I think it was our third date, we talked about how many kids we wanted to have. So, we really just got into it, and I'll share why we got into it that fast. You'll understand why later. But we selected a couple that we asked to be our accountability couple. This was an older married couple. And we said, hey, listen, we want to protect ourselves from the temptations that we are facing, and so we asked them to hold us accountable. And so I would meet with him, Becky would meet with her, we would meet with them together, and they would ask us the questions that you don't want to be asked. They would ask us really uncomfortable questions, and so it was a solid motivation for them to, as Becky said, speak into our lives, but it was also a solid motivation to behave. Because you didn't want to have to answer their questions with anything other than we have behaved. So that was huge, just having that accountability couple in our lives during that process.
That's so good. And Becky hit on this a little bit, but I just want to reiterate, we do offer premarital counseling here. So please take advantage of that if you're newly engaged or just about to think about getting engaged. Please take advantage of that. We would love to come alongside you during that journey and just be there for you as best as we can. Okay, next question reads, we're engaged to be married this year after 9 years together. He's afraid if we sign papers to be married, it will complicate our lives more. I want everything official, signed and dated. Could this still work out? Pastor Dave?
Always giving me the tough questions. No. I would say this, I have a lot more questions that I would want to ask than I have an answer for this. What's driving the fear behind, one of the statements made in this question is, if we get married, it'll get more complicated. But I would want to know what the fear of the complication is. What's behind wanting everything to be signed and dated? It feels more contractual than it does a marriage based on mutual love. And so I would want to spend time with this couple just to sit down and dig into this deeper, because it doesn't sound like, I would want this couple to be successful, and I just have more questions than I can really answer. What drove the decision to get engaged after 9 years of relationship, and what's driving that feeling? And I'm wondering if both couples, both individuals really feel the same way about this idea of marriage. So just a lot of conversation I would want to have.
Yeah, that's good. Pastor Luke?
I think simple answer is yes. It can still work. We've seen marriages come from a lot and become very successful mentor-type marriages where they end up mentoring other people. So the answer is yes. I agree with Pastor Dave. I think there's some questions behind the question. I don't think that's the root of it. I don't think isn't a fear of signing it and things becoming more complicated. There's something else underlining that is keeping him from being willing to take that step after already being in a relationship for 8 years. And so for my thing, I would say the answer is yes, but I would say you're going to have some hard conversations before you say yes. And I would encourage that person to, and any of you who are in a state that's similar to that, to invite someone into the process. Whether that's the premarital counseling, but you have to both be willing to invite a third party into the process and into that conversation that can maybe ask some of those tough questions for you. Of what's the real root of this? Those are questions, again, that you want to ask before you say I do, before you take that step in that process and go further in your relationship. So I would say, yes, it can. There are just some flags that are on the field, if you will, and I would definitely take a look at those with some other guidance before saying yes and just forcing the hand.
Yeah, great advice. All right, so here's kind of a fun question. I think it can be fun anyways. Let's keep it fun. For all the pastors and their wives, what's something your spouse does that drives you nuts? Let's play fair.
She can't keep her hands off me. And so I'm trying to prepare a sermon, leave me alone. I'm not a piece of meat. And it just really gets to be something.
Rhea. Never
I
would
can't
have
top
thought
that
about you.
answer. Well, if anybody has been on the road with my husband, they'll understand this. His driving.
Whiplash City.
We've joked about this a lot when we were getting ready. For us, I think it really just comes down to a simple question. Can we agree or disagree that there is a right and a wrong way to load the dishwasher? Amen? And some people have that gifting and others don't. And so, I think it's a comical battle in our house, so yeah.
Is it comical, really? Okay. I literally get so annoyed with how he loads the dishwasher. Because I will load the dishwasher, and guess what he will do? He will come behind me and take everything out and redo it. So, I feel like it's a serious issue. We should probably meet with you guys later.
We need some counseling. Becky.
Well, if any of you heard the sermon last week, you would understand that it's when he buys a really big TV and doesn't ask me first.
Up until this moment, I didn't have an answer. And now my answer is when she brings up past things that are supposed to be forgiven and forgotten.
And the good thing is we not only have for premarital counseling, but marriage counseling as well, too. Yeah.
Please take advantage.
We teach from experience.
It would be our pleasure. Okay, next question. Pastor Dave and Becky, what do you do when you're married to someone who isn't motivated to work on the marriage?
I would say you can only control yourself. You cannot control your spouse. You can't will him to change or her to change. And I'd say stay focused on God. Stay focused on what God has for your life. And then sometimes we can say this as a cliche, let's just pray about it. No, it's not just pray. It's pray, 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 because God answers prayers.
Absolutely.
In 1 John 5:16, if you see any brother or sister commit a sin that does not lead to death, you should pray and God will give them life.
Pastor Dave?
I'll give you a name of a couple from our last ministry. I'm going to use pretend names. We'll call them Bill and Jane. And Jane grew up as a missionary's kid, got saved at a young age. Bill was not. And so Jane attended church. Her kids grew up in the church. Bill let them go because it made his wife nice. It's the best we could figure. We prayed as a church for Bill for years, and for 20 years they were praying for Bill. For 20 years, she graciously loved her husband. She graciously supported her husband. She never said anything negative about her husband. She came to church by herself. She went on retreats by herself. She raised her children in the church by herself. But she continued to do this because she wanted to show love and grace towards her husband and believed that's what she was called to do. And she put all the time and effort into this relationship until one day at Easter service, this is one of the 2 times a year he came to church, Christmas and Easter. At Easter service, he gave his life to Christ. And the reality is, at that point, his eyes were opened and he realized what she had been doing for that 20 years in their marriage. It was not about what he didn't put into the marriage. It was what she was called to put into her relationship and into her husband and their relationship. It wasn't contingent on what he did or didn't do.
Wow, that's so powerful. Pastor Luke, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would add on to what they both said. I think it's an incredible, especially what Becky said about, you have to choose what you can control. And what you can control is the culture you create as a spouse. And, it's a lot like our relationship with Jesus, honestly. Is God loved us in a way that we would want to love him back. He didn't say, I'm only going to love you if this, or I'm only going to love you if that. God just began to love us. And our relationship with God was built on this idea and mindset of, look at what he's done for me. How could I not want to do that in return? And I think as spouses, and this is any relationship, this is how you love your kids as parents, how you love your employees as a leader, or as a coworker, or your neighbors. It's you choosing to what you can control. And what you can control is the culture that you're going to create. That's one of love, and creates this culture to where your spouse looks and says, how do they love me that much? And it comes to a point to where there's not a guilt in it. There's a desire that they want to love you that much in return. So.
Awesome. All right. Pastor Dave, the next question reads, when there's conflict, is given the silent treatment the right way to handle the situation? And if so, how long should a silent treatment last?
It all depends. If I'm giving the silent treatment, it can last indefinitely. But if she's giving it, it should be limited, maybe to a few hours. No, I'm kidding. The reality is I'm going to make an assumption on this question and assume that the silent treatment is being used as more of a punishment. And if that's the case, then the silent treatment shouldn't be applied ever at any moment in time. If you're using the silent treatment, if you're being silent because you really need time to process and you're trying to choose your words carefully and think through your feelings about something, then being silent is okay, but not if you're using it as a way of punishing your spouse. I think when we try to do it this way, Proverbs 3:10 kind of speaks into where we come from when we're trying to do this, when we're trying to punish. It says, where there is strife, there is pride. And so oftentimes our pride gets in the way, and we believe that we are right, and so we believe we have the right to then punish our spouse until they agree with us. Remember what I shared with you last week? It was the wisdom of my wife. The one who wins the fight the most is often the one who is acting the least like Jesus. And instead, maybe something that would guide our response in this type of situation is from Ephesians 4:2-3. It says, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Instead of using the silent treatment to try to prove yourself right or win an argument, open communication, and do that in the spirit and the bond of unity with each other. And in that, I think you honor each other, you honor your relationship.
Yeah, that's so good. It's hard sometimes, though. You have to be brutally honest with yourself and check your heart to see, really where you're at. Am I doing this to be helpful or hurtful? So that was a really good answer. Pastor Luke, do you have
No,
something?
I think it completely. The answer is no, it's not okay to use. Not in a form of punishment, as Pastor Dave said. I think there's a moments when silence is helpful in a marriage. It's in that moment where you're seeking your filter and really asking the question, as Desiree said, is what I want to say helpful or hurtful for what's happening? Is this going to be a moment where I choose the vulnerability of transparency and just reveal my heart to my spouse as to how that hurt me or how I took it? You know, that's something that we always fault people on when it's on us. It's not about what you say, it's what people will hear. So you can think, well, I didn't say it that way. It doesn't matter. What matters is what they heard. And there's a responsibility and accountability that comes when we speak. And it's understanding, it's not just what I think I'm saying, it's what are they going to hear. And so it's looking back at that. And I think there's moments where silence can be that moment of, it can never be punishment. You never withhold something from your spouse from punishment, as punishment. But when it comes to that point of, I'm going to use this as a moment of filter or just a moment of prayer. When we combat that conflict or whatever it was, or from typically go back to the question a minute ago of, you know, when the other spouse isn't motivated in the marriage, there's a moment where silence and prayer comes into play. Christine does a great thing with that, with the cards and all that stuff. Yeah.
There is a site called Revive Our Hearts. That is it's a free 30-day thing where you can put in basically anything to pray for your kids, to pray for your spouse, to pray for yourself. But it'll give you a scripture every single day of like specific things of how to shield your kids' eyes, how to shield your husband's eyes, how to give your husband encouragement in leadership with finances, it's very, very specific. So what I started doing is I would write those prayers out on like note cards, index cards, and I put them underneath the mattresses of all the beds in our house. So when you sleep at our house, if you're even a guest, that bed has all these prayers underneath it. And it's been something, you know, what Becky and Pastor Dave said too, about that prayer is such a catalyst, really. That is it for our life, for my life. Like there are two things every day that I ask the Lord for. Lord, give me a desire for my husband, and Lord, give me a passion to read your word. Like let it speak to me. So when you are like bringing all of those things in, it transforms everything else. And there are so many great tools to help you figure out how to do so many things that are free and available. I think that you just have to put effort into it, you know?
Absolutely.
And I'd say there's something that because I discovered that one day. It was like flipping the mattress over, like just because you're supposed to, you know, once every 5 years. And I'm like, what the heck is this? Like, it's just like all these cards underneath the mattress. And I start reading through and I'm like, oh my gosh, like so you talk about silently creating a culture of what only you can choose. Like she chose, and there's things in there that she had chosen to be praying for me about that she never told me. And those were things that she wasn't going to confront me on, but she just wanted to put it before the Lord, that God would speak to me about those things. And to know that she was creating this subculture in our home of prayer for me, and that God would turn my heart instead of just this nag attack type moment. It was just an incredible thing, and it made me want to do the same thing to her. I'm not near as good about being consistent in it, but it created this thing of that I want to love like that in return.
That's so good. I love that so
Can I
much.
ask, what was the name of that website again? Revived?
It's called Revive Our Hearts.
Revive Our
Revive Our
Hearts.
Hearts.
Okay.
And there are different, like, it will allow you to put in, like, if you need encouragement, if you need to feel, like, a desire for your husband. And we did this for Bella Grace before she actually went off to kindergarten a couple of years ago for, like, courage and for her to have confidence. And y'all, over that summer, she literally transformed into a different child. Bella used to be very timid and very quiet and shy. And if you meet her now, she's very bubbly and loves to serve and wants to talk to you. And, you know, I credit that to the Lord's faithfulness in the power of prayer. Just all things are possible.
Amen. That's so good. Okay. Back to Pastor Lucas. How do you balance work, life, and God as a family?
I think the best piece of advice I ever got when it came to balance was someone told me balance is impossible. It's not about balance, it's about rhythm. Balance is tough and nearly impossible because the seasons of life require different things to have a focus greater than others when it comes to our time. But we've chosen that we look at rhythms of life. And so for us, we understand that there's going to be rhythms in our life, and we're going to sometimes play at a faster pace than we are at other seasons. And the good thing about seasons is that seasons change. I know we don't understand that in Florida, but seasons do change. And so just because you're running at 1,000 miles an hour now doesn't mean that that won't slow down. But for us, the success within a fast season or a slow season was that we chose constants. And so we chose things in our life that are going to be consistent no matter the season. So our relationship with God is always going to be there. Our relationship and time with each other is always going to be there. Our relationship and time with our kids as a family is always going to be there. Now those look different in the seasons, and so don't compare fall to spring, okay? So like right now, for example, like you might be in a season where you can get 15 minutes a day with the Lord. Then you might have a season where you got an hour a day. It's not that one was healthier than the other. As long as you're choosing to have that as a constant in your life, that's the important part. We've been in seasons where we got to go on a date every week. Then there's been seasons of poverty, struggle, and kids where, you know, it's like maybe we choose once a month, but then we're making sure that we still get daily time together or weekly time together to unwind, to have a conversation, to just decompress from the day. And even with our kids, we're in a busy season right now of our life to where we'd started neglecting that bedtime routine with our kids. We would still pray, but it was like, all right, pray, Jesus, thank you, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, go to bed. And then we realized we're missing that. The extra 15 minutes of sleep is not worth the 15 minutes that we're missing of getting to talk to them about their day, read a book with them, help Reagan learn to read, and let them tell us things and really, really pray with them, not just this quick. Actually, being present, absolutely. And so for us, that was key. But there's something that Christine, I know, kind of had learned through rhythm too.
So actually, when Luke and I were dating, I have always been very busy and involved in as many things as possible. I love to like help and do stuff. And Luke and I would hang out, and he'd be like, "Okay, but what are you doing for yourself? Like, what are you doing for you? Like you time?" I'm like, "What are you talking about? I'm doing all these things." And it was something that he really pressed on me of like, you need to have some just time where it's something that you're doing, something that you love, whether it's taking a walk. I don't super love the outdoors, but I'll go outside. If whatever it might be, working out, doing something, painting, taking a class and learning how to make pottery, something like that. We love spending time together. I love spending time with other people, but there is something that I think every human being needs, something just to recharge themselves, because sometimes you can become the better version of yourself when you just get a few minutes to yourself. As a wife, it is very crucial for me that I spend time with the Lord and am investing in that relationship with the Lord, because then it allows me to pour out. And as a mom, I have to have that too, because if you've ever been like running on fumes or running empty, and if you're always like perpetually late, like I'm a perpetually late person, it creates all this crazy chaos sometimes, and it can set the house like, it's tense. So really, as a mom and a wife, you a lot of times set the tone in your home. And so if you are constantly like running on empty and you're running on fumes and you feel like you're not getting you time because you're always doing for everyone else, where that's not a bad thing, but it's like you have to have that time where you can also pour back into yourself. And so I think that's something that we have worked really hard at in our home, of making sure. And then, your kids watch everything that you do. Like whether you think they do or not, they're literally always watching. And the thing that Luke said about bedtime is that I think we've discovered like the most like their crazy dreams, or like the way that they pray, or the way that they ask God for certain things. Like those are those sweet moments that we get by just spending a little bit of extra time, sacrificing some time somewhere else, and then we get something that's just invaluable with them because of us creating stuff.
There's a great resource, by the way, for a tune-up for any marriage. There's a retreat called A Weekend to Remember by Family Life. There's one coming up in June. We'll have information for you at the end. I really recommend get an oil change for your marriage. Go to a marriage retreat, and a lot of these things you'll cover in there as well.
Yeah. Take care of yourself, and then you're able to take care of each other, and then take care of your family, and it just trickles down. So very much priority. Okay, last question for Pastor Mark. If for some reason beyond your control you can't get married, but you will living together be forgiven?
So great question, but I think it's the wrong question. And a lot of times we think that for economic reasons or other reasons that this is the way it's got to be. And matter of fact, I can remember before I became a believer arguing with my friends' grandparents, talking about why living together makes so much sense economically, and that's the only way you can find out if somebody's really compatible for you. And then I relayed this argument to a friend of mine who was a psychology major at Marquette University. And she looked at me and she said, "You're dead wrong." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Mark, for decades, sociologists have done research on this and have proven that living together is actually something that undermines the future of a marriage." And I didn't realize that. And what happens is certain attitudes are carried into marriage that you had when you didn't have to be in it for life that sometimes undermine the future of that. And so, I think the right question isn't, am I forgiven? The right question is, do I want God's best? That's really it. And if you can trust Christ with your soul for eternity, then you can surely trust him to lead you with wisdom here and now. And so I think, it's like Jesus, he said in Luke 6:46, he said, "So why do you keep calling me Lord, Lord, when you don't do what I say?" And I think it's confusing to Jesus. Like, why do you say you believe in me and want to follow me, but then you actually don't apply my wisdom in your life? And I think it's also confusing to non-Christians, because when somebody says, "Hey, I follow Jesus," and then they see the way we live, I think they go, "That doesn't make sense to me." And marriage is actually a beautiful, beautiful vehicle that God has created to help your children see what the love of God looks like, and to help your neighbors to see what the love of God looks like as well. And so the real question is do I want God's best? That's the question. God's ultimate goal isn't just heaven, it's life. It's that you experience vitality, spiritual vitality. It's that there is love flowing in your life the way God created you to be able to love. And so, when you do it God's way, you experience the blessings of God, because the power of God always flows where the authority of God is honored. And so that surrender is really key. So anyway, so marriage is an act of faith, and it's a way that we honor God in the way that we do it. So my challenge to everybody is this: don't make it your goal to stay married. Make it your goal to have a great marriage. And let God reveal his love through the way that you learn to love one another, and you'll get there. So, hey, I just want us to give thanks to all these guys here, Desiree for leading us. I'm going to turn this over to Pastor Luke.
Hey, man, y'all give a hand one more time for our pastors and our wives. There's always so much more that we want to say and answer, but we've gotten to talk a lot about the different uniquenesses and different areas of marriage and relationships. And I hope that, again, as someone who's single or divorced or widowed, you don't discard anything that's been said. Like Pastor Mark said, sometimes you're in a season where the advice and the knowledge you receive, you can pass on to those who need it. But understand too that when we talk about marriage, for the most part, a lot of those are very practical towards any relationship. Because I think the common thread that hopefully you've seen throughout the entire series is that what happy couples know is this doesn't happen by accident. Healthy marriages, healthy relationships in general don't happen by accident. They don't happen by chance, but by choice. It's decisions that we make and choices that we choose that will put forth and put us in a position where we can have a healthy and happy marriage and healthy, happy relationships with our spouse, our children, our coworkers, our neighbors, our parents, etc. But the key that I don't want you to miss this morning before you head out and before you start thinking about what I'm going to eat for lunch or anything like that is where the foundation of all that lies. Again, every healthy relationship begins with a choice. And for us, our healthy marriage began with the choice, and Pastor Mark mentioned it at the very beginning, that we chose a relationship with Jesus as the foundation. A lot of times it's not just communication that you're missing. It's not anything like that. What we're missing is a relationship with Jesus. It's not just that you don't communicate well with your spouse, it's that you don't communicate with God because you don't have a relationship with Jesus. And I want to encourage you this morning, before you head out, before you even begin to look back at that relationship, whatever it is that's on your heart this morning, is to ask yourself that question. Do I have a relationship with Jesus? And if I do, is it the foundation of everything I'm standing on? Is it the foundation of my marriage? Is it the foundation of my parenting? Is it the foundation of how I treat people at work and in our community? Is it the foundation of how I treat that neighbor whose dog keeps pooping on my yard, okay? What is the foundation of all my relationships in my time on earth? And if it's not Jesus, I want to encourage you that that's the answer. That's the question that needs to be asked, and that's the answer that you're probably missing in order to have a healthy relationship and healthy marriages.
Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us today. And if our ministry has been a source of encouragement for you, let me encourage you to do two things. Number one, share it with a friend who needs hope. That would make a big difference in their life. Secondly, share it with us. We would love to hear your story. You can send us an email at amen@bridgechurchfl.com. And finally, if you'd like to partner with us financially as we bring hope both locally and around the world, you can do that directly through our website, bridgechurchfl.com/give. And thank you for letting us be a part of your spiritual journey.